Hello and welcome to Bedroom Producing with Chris Porro. I'm Chris Porro. Today we're going to go over a short section of a song that I produced. We'll listen to the demo and we'll listen to the as I call it, the release version of it. And I'll go through all the practical tips and tricks and secrets and just give everything away. Hopefully it'll be useful and practical since it is something that got used on a real song. So let's listen to the release version. This is what was released a few days ago. And again, we're just going to listen to a section of this.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids' shows. Swimming in tiny circles, is that for my mentals? I'm feeling murderous but also sad. My dorsal fin is droopy as a meat flap.
So just that section right there, because this is going to be kind of a long-form show, kind of like a Joe Rogan of bedroom producers, where I will go into a lot of detail. But what I will try to do is, and feel free to jump around in the chapters on this video. What I will try to do is I'll try to front load the most important stuff, so you don't, I hate that teaser crap where they put the cool stuff at the end of the video to keep you watching. I'm gonna basically give it all at the front of each chapter, and then if you want to stick around and listen to the details, you can do that. Let's go to the DAW here. Let's listen to the demo, and then right after that we'll listen to the finished version. It's important. One of the things I'm going to cover on this show is kind of some of the guiding principles of like when you're trying to mix or produce something, and the better ways to compare stuff. And when you're comparing stuff, you always want to volume match them, and you want to listen to them really close together. You don't want to listen to something, take a break, come back and listen to the other thing. It's very hard for your ears to do that. So let's listen to these back to back.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids' shows. Swimming in tiny circles, is that for my mentals? I'm feeling murderous but also sad. My dorsal fin is droopy as a meat flap. I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids' shows. Swimming in tiny circles, is that for my mentals? I'm feeling murderous but also sad. My dorsal fin is droopy as a meat flap.
Okay, so you might say to yourself, well, the release version sounds like it's louder or something. It's not. It actually isn't metering louder. If you watch the meters on this, the kick on the demo version was actually quite a bit louder, where the bass kicks in, and that's one of the things I had to address. There was just too much bass frequency. Some people might say you can't have too much bass frequency, but you certainly can. And it's really dependent on the genre of music you're doing. Old school country, not so much bass. Clubby club, a lot more bass. So it really depends on the style that you're doing. I break this thing down into 3 parts roughly: drums, vocals, and ambience. Okay, so on the drum front, the first thing is you want to use drum sounds that you like. So if you've got a demo and you want a release version, the first thing would be to replace those demo drum sounds with drums you like. The other thing I did here is I rearranged some of the patterns. I'm not particularly fond of the trap stuff that's going on in here. If we listen to it.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids' shows. Swimming in tiny circles, is that...
I don't particularly think that adds much to this quiet section of the song. So I basically reprogrammed in a different beat for that. And I think those are the 2 things: drum replacement and making sure that, whatever pattern you have sounds good. There's also some processing that I'll go over, but those are the 3 things. So as far as drum replacement goes, we listen to this.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids' shows. Swimming.
I'm okay with the kick sound. I'm not okay with the snare sound. It's too it's too trappy. It's too dated for my ears, and I don't like the hi-hat. In general, the stuff that comes out of SoundCloud or Soundtrap, I'm sorry, is oversweetened, and by that I mean it's too compressed, it's too EQ'd, and you can't get rid of that stuff. So it's always got this kind of very in your face sound. that's good on some stuff. I guess they'd call it radio ready, but you really have no control. So what I did is I used the kick, which will be, let's find the kick.
I'm tired of jumping.
Oh, there it is, named kick. So I used the kick, but I did a few things to it. Let's go to the effects here. And I'm going to bypass some of this stuff. So here's the kick before the processing. It's got that the attack on it there's a very kind of like fine click attack on it. It's a little too focused, I thought, so I added this. This is a lot of these plugins are free plugins you can find. So I added this distortion. So let's listen to it with distortion without. Right? And then I added quite a bit of EQ. And note that I took out a lot of the really low end. This is stuff that's under 100 cycles. Now, this is the stuff that was eating up all the sonic space, as I was saying before, in the demo. If you watch the demo and the meters, or you rewind it and you see where the demo is hitting the meters, that kick drum, although it doesn't sound very loud, it's making the meters jump up really high. And that's because, like I said, it's on the threshold of this area where humans stop hearing. The really low stuff, like maybe 40 cycles, 20 cycles. It's hard to hear 20 cycles, but yet it will take up a lot of your space, and that's generally not a good thing. Let's listen to it before and after the EQ. The reason you're not seeing this meter jump any differently when I bypass the EQ is because there is a master compressor on here. It's basically, extremely compressing that bass and limiting it at a certain point. That's the kick. I kept the kick. Notice there's there might be a tiny bit of space around it, but there's no reverb or anything like that. Generally for kicks and snares, if you want them to be really forward, you take the reverb off. Sometimes snares have this big splashy reverb on them, or not splashy, but a reverb that makes it sound like a gun, and sometimes that's effective, but you usually don't hear that on kicks. So let's go to the snare. So this was the original snare, and I put in what I call my snare. Let's just listen to that. It has a different tone than the demo, but it is also really in your face. And let's see how I accomplish that really in your face thing, because this is a real snare. This is the waveform of the snare that I played, and this is the particular snare that I selected, because I go through and I listen to all the snare hits, because sometimes they're quite different, and I pick one that I like. It depends on how hard you're hitting the snare, where you hit the snare on the head, but they don't all sound the same. The big thing I did here is I compressed the bejesus out of it. With this over-the-top compressor, which is free. And then I also EQ'd it quite a bit, I believe. No, just, what is this? Looks like it's a 3 decibel boost at about 10K. High end. So let's listen to it before the processing. And after. So it's way more aggressive. The other thing you might notice is that it's kind of truncated. And that's because when I set this up, and by truncated, I mean shortened. If you look at this, if we could increase the waveform in here, we'd see that this is the tail, and I've stopped it short. It should really end out here if I wanted a natural decay. But I wasn't quite going for that natural decay. For example, if I bring this out, if I bring this release out, if I knew what I was doing, there we go. So if I bring this out, we'll get a more natural decay, right? You also get a little bit of snare ring in there. So let's see if I can undo that. Okay. So that's what I was going for on that. Let's move to the hi-hat. This is a different pattern. It's way simpler. I think it works better in this song. It's actually just accents. It's just these, I think they're triplets. Yeah. So again, this is a live hi-hat. It's probably that hi-hat right behind me or another hi-hat that I have. I wouldn't say you need to buy like whole drum kits, but if you just get the snare, a hi-hat, and maybe a cymbal and buy that stuff used, if you have the money to do that and these are the sounds that you're going for, I think that's a good way to spend money. The other thing you can do is you can play full patterns. If you can drum a little bit, you can play full patterns, which will be extremely hard to program the nuance of actually playing a pattern on a hi-hat. So that's another thing. And then you would just take a bar or two of that and use it. So let's listen to this. Let's see what's going on. Again, here's my incredibly simple sampler that just comes free with Reaper. Here, I picked out a single hit that I really liked, which was this one, because they do sound quite a bit different hit to hit, especially depending on how open you have that hi-hat, what you use to hit the hi-hat with, how hard you hit it, where you hit it on the hi-hat. There's a lot of nuance that you can get out of that, which is the reason I like it so much, because when you go to Soundtrap, you might have 15 different hi-hats you can pick from, but you really can't dial them in. If you have an idea in your head, it's a really great idea to have that instrument there so you can dial it in on the instrument rather than try to select it from a bunch of samples that you might not like any of those samples. So the only thing going on here is some EQ. Let's listen with and without. Without. So there's a lot of low end in that. I'll bypass this while we're listening. I really don't need that low end. Sometimes I'll let that come through, but I really don't think we need it here. So let's listen to the drums all together. There's also a wood block, and the wood block is coming in on the off beat. I didn't do anything with that. It came out of Soundtrap. It has some printed reverb on it, and we can listen to it right here. Let's listen to this whole section, though. Okay, so that's the drums. Now let's talk about the vocals. Let's listen to the demo again.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids' shows. Swimming in tiny circles is bad for my mentals. I'm feeling murderous but also sad.
So there's at least two voices in there. The delivery is pretty, smooth and relaxed. It's not really like in your face. It's kind of far away. There's quite a bit of reverb on it.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids' shows. Swimming in tiny circles is bad for my mental.
There's some reverb on it. And what I was going for in this song is something that was a lot more upfront, felt like it was closer to you, like the person was singing closer to you. A little bit more articulation. So it's me singing, so I reperformed the vocals pretty close to the mic and with a little bit more articulation. And again, there's more than one vocal track, so let's listen to them back to back real quick.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids' shows. Swimming in tiny circles is bad for my mentals. I'm feeling murderous but also sad. My dorsal fin is droopy.
So it's a bit of a telephone effect. Let's see how I did this. One thing I like to do is put all the vocals from, I think there's three people singing in this song, and I like to put them all in a folder so I can easily just solo.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoop.
I can solo, these are all tracks with my voice on them, little clips here and there. So I put them in a folder so when I hit solo, I can just hear my vocals. It's also nice if you want to put out an instrumental version of your song. You would just, I have a folder, Mark has a folder, Sean has a folder. That's 3 solos, or 3 mutes, I'm sorry. And then you just export it out without any vocals in it, especially when you have a big track count. But let's listen to this.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids' shows. Swimming in tiny circles is bad for my mentals. I'm feeling murderous but also sad. My dorsal fin is droopy as a meat flap.
Okay, so I'll tell you what I hear the difference in. First of all, there's extreme EQ. It's almost like a single band, or somebody might say it's like a recording from the 1920s or something like that. So there's extreme EQ on this. There's a lot of compression on it. The main vocal is very dry, and then there's an accent that has reverb on it. So if you listen again, I'll go like this when we hear the accent.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids shows. Swimming in tiny circles is bad for my mentals.
Okay, so let's see how this was accomplished. And I should say there's 2 tracks. These are what they call unison tracks. It's just the same vocal performance, everything. I try to get them both to be exactly the same mic position, same vocal delivery, same timing. There's no harmonies. They're both going down the center, which helps. They're not the same volume. This is kind of like something I put in there to just kind of thicken up the main vocal, which is this.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids shows. Swimming in tiny circles is bad for my mentals. I'm feeling murderous but also sad. My dorsal fin is droopy as a meat flap.
So when I take out the second voice, I feel like to the layperson, to most people listening back to this, to like a fan, they're just going to perceive it as a single voice. But the second voice at a lower volume, it's about 7 decibels lower, just gives it a nice extra fullness. I'll play it one more time.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids shows. Swimming in tiny circles is bad for my mentals. I'm feeling murderous but also sad.
And I'm toggling back and forth so you can kind of hear the subtle difference. Let's look at the processing on here. So crazy amount of EQ, right? Not only the low end, but the high end. So this is very much like the telephone sound, which tends to be centered around 1K. This is centered around about 2 or 3K. And then a whole lot of compression, again, this over-the-top compressor. And then a little bit of distortion. So let's listen to it with nothing on it. I think this might be quite hot, so I'm going to pull this down.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids shows. Swimming in tiny circles is bad for my mentals. I'm feeling murderous but also...
It's a huge difference. After the EQ and the compression, it's very much sounding EQ and more like upfront. Like almost like somebody is whispering in your ear. And so we'll listen to this and I'll bypass it a few times.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids shows. Swimming in tiny circles is bad for my mentals. I'm feeling murderous but also sad. My dorsal fin is droopy.
You can tell by all the bass that's in this that I was fairly close to the mic because of the proximity effect. As you get closer to the mic, you get more artificial boost of bass. So I'm thinking I was probably in somewhere like this. And my general mic placement is somewhere between maybe 14 inches and maybe 4 inches. So that's how we got that. And let's look at these accent vocals. So first thing I notice is they are panned off to the left and right, because for the accent vocals, I'm just going for something that sounds kind of like bigger sounding, and about 35% off to the left and right is kind of a sweet spot. Around there is a sweet spot for, like, you don't want them totally separated, right and left speaker, right? And you don't want them straight down the middle. This is a nice kind of like widening. This is what I think is kind of like a sweet spot. So let's look at the processing on these. Again, over the top compressor, and this is even more extreme. This literally is what they call a band pass, which is just like a single band. So that band would be around 3K here, and then it's kind of sloping off on either side. And this distortion, again, is pretty subtle. Let's just listen to the original and the process version. The other thing I should mention is I tracked the complete line on these accents, but I'm just automating it up where they actually occur. So, if we were to play from here across, like there's 0 volume here, right? And then I automate it up for the accent. I'll turn the metronome on so you can hear it's in time.
Skid shows.
Let's bypass this and just listen to this chunk of audio right here. And I probably need to bring this down quite a bit, is what I'm guessing.
Skid shows. kids shows. It's kids shows.
It's a big difference in EQ. And then I'm going out to Valhalla Reverb, which I'm thinking has 2 or 3 seconds worth of decay, which is a long decay. Let's take a look at that. Yeah, 2.2 seconds of decay. I like Valhalla Reverb a lot, but there's a lot of good reverbs out there. But I use this constantly. It's kind of my go-to reverb. Okay, so that's what's happening with the vocals. Let's listen to them one more time. All 4 tracks together.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids shows. Swimming in tiny circles is bad for my mentals. I'm feeling murderous but also sad.
Okay, so let's move on to part 3 here, ambiance. And remember, I kind of break this down into 3 parts: drums, vocals, ambience. So let's listen to the ambience in the demo version.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids shows. Swimming in tiny circles is bad for my mentals.
So really what we have for ambience is a whale sample, a water sample at the beginning of that. And then if you want to count the reverb on the voice as a little bit of ambience, but it's really like the whale sample and the water sample. And now let's listen to the finished version.
I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids shows. Swimming in tiny circles is bad for my mentals. I'm feeling murderous but also sad. My dorsal fin is droopy as a meat flap.
In the original version, there was no kind of chordal structure around this. It was simply me singing in whatever key I thought it was in, because there's really nothing for me to latch onto. I was kind of singing in a vacuum. I think the earlier parts of the song kind of cued me in on where the key was, and so I probably was in key. Okay, so we have 4 things in here. We have a bass. We have a acoustic guitar, which fades up. This acoustic guitar has 2 parts. We have a piano. And we have a whale sample. Right? And the whale sample's almost like functions as percussion, because as you can hear it, it's almost like a hi-hat or something like that. Not in its sound, but in the sense that it's jip, 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 coming in at a defined interval, like maybe a drum would. I figured out a chord progression that I liked for these vocals. And let me just show you what I mean by it kind of being a weird one. I think that I just figured out something by ear that I liked. So we've got looks like a D major. Then we have a D minor over here. And then we have a, what is this? G? A G major. Followed by a G minor, which is kind of a weird thing to do. But it worked. You know, that's the most important thing, that it sounds good. Regardless of what... I do believe in theory. I believe theory can help you out. It can tell you where to look. It can make things faster. But I'm not so much like want to force everything into a theory box. If it sounds good, it sounds good. And so I've got this chord progression, and all I'm doing on the guitar is playing the same chords that the piano is, and all I'm doing with the bass is, I think, playing the root note. Let's see. So all I'm doing in the bass is playing a D, I believe it is, which is the first chord, right? And I'm playing that all the way through. So let's take a look at these tracks individually. So for the bass, I have played this in. This is the bass that's back there. I've tried to use sampled basses. I almost never use them anymore because I can almost never get the sound or the coolness or the vibe with the canned bass. The sampled basses, although they sound cool and they're recorded really well, it's often not the bass voice that I want on the recordings. So again, to actually have the instrument here, so you can play it close to the bridge, you can play it further up the neck, you can change the pickup settings, you can play it with your own fingers, which makes a big difference, how hard you hit things, and then you can just dial it in and make it like the bass that your song requires. all I did is I found a section of this that I liked, this rhythm, and I just repeated it again and again and again, and it's just supposed to sit down there and fill up space and add to vibe. And as far as what's going on here, there's a pretty good amount of compression on there. There's a second compressor. This is a side chain, so when the kick hits, it ducks the bass. If you're not familiar with that, sometimes when you get the kick and the bass hitting together, it's a little bit too much. So the trick is you have a compressor basically bring down the volume of the bass, but only when the kick is hitting. And if we turn the kick on, we can hear this actually happen, and we can watch it happen too. Let's listen to this. So you can see this is pulling down about 6 decibels every time the kick hits. You can hear it. It's pretty subtle, but it's a good mixing technique to be aware of. And now let's bypass the compressor here and listen to the difference. So there's a lot more like attack with that compressor on, a lot more definition and like attack, like kind of clickiness to the beginning. It's kind of medium subtle. I think it's pretty easy to pick out. You know, the other thing I have to say is like, use your ears. Now, you get better at using your ears with the more time you spend doing this stuff, but don't think because you've read bass needs tons of compression or bass needs tons of EQ or any of the stuff that you read necessarily applies to your song. Once you've developed your ears, you'll hear a bass that works in your song, or you'll hear the piano that you want in your song. And then it's a matter of like, how can you get that piano sound? And maybe you use EQ, maybe you don't. Maybe you use tons of compression, maybe there's no compression. Maybe you don't touch the track. Maybe you just leave it alone. And this is kind of the wisdom that comes after you do this stuff for a while and you really use your ears a lot. So that's the bass. The trick over here that I used is I've got these 2 guitar parts. Now, one thing to notice is they're both being automated up. So they're slowly fading from the beginning right here. So it's a gradual fade up. So I've just got these 2 automations. They start low, they get higher. The other thing is there's 2 parts, right? And the 2 parts give it kind of a fullness. And again, I've got them panned off about 30%. This one's 41%. And so when we listen to them together, you can see that this is some kind of strum or something, or a single note because of this waveform. You've got a lot of volume here, and then it goes down. And you notice that they're happening at the top of the measure. So it probably is a strum. Yeah. And over here, this is kind of a more single notey arpeggiated thing. We just put snap on, and we'll listen to these last 2 bars as the fade is mostly coming up here. And as far as processing goes, what do we have going on? See, there's no EQ on this. A lot of times people will EQ an acoustic guitar to death, but because a lot of times they've got way too much bass for the full mix, right? There's actually, like, you know, usually there's a bass guitar in there or something taking up that low space. So what they'll do is they'll completely EQ that guitar. I don't have any EQ on this at all. I do have a compressor, and I'm guessing the compressor is... Let's bypass it and see what it's doing. So what this compressor is doing is it's actually kind of like smoothing out the sound if you listen to it before and after. I'll toggle this back and forth. This is a little more Without the compressor, it's a little bit more clicky. It's a little bit more like 4K type of thing. So this is actually like mellowing the sound. Yeah, it's mellowing the sound, and it's making this peak not so much of a stick out type of peak. All right, let us move to the piano. This is Piano Tech, which is like a virtual piano. It's actually synthesized. It doesn't use samples, which is crazy. There's no piano samples in this thing. And it's a fairly low voice, you know? Fairly low. Like somewhere between bass and mid-range. And there's, again, there's no EQ on this. So it's very much dependent upon what your mix needs. So don't get into this mindset of presets, or I need to do this, or I don't need to do this. Primarily listen with your ears. Listen with your ears. Listen to a reference mix. Maybe I'll make another video about fast tracking mixing. All right, let's listen to this last thing. This is the whale sample. So this is an actual whale, but it's been pitched up. Again, I'm using the Reaper sampler. You can see that this is the whole chunk of audio with the whale on it, but I'm just using this little piece right here that I handpicked, and I said, oh, this is the particular whale sound I want. Again, you can see it's truncated. I chopped the end off of it, and of course it's pitched up way higher than a whale would be. And let's just listen to that. Now, if we wanted to, we could run this as we could run it ignoring MIDI notes, and we could hear the original samples. It still doesn't really sound like a whale because I've shortened the sound so much. It's just like a blip. If I lengthen this sound out, and I say, right now it's obeying note offs, so these are fairly short notes. And when they come to their end, so does the sample. But if we play it back like this, not obeying note offs and the full sample, we'll hear what the whale sounds like. I heard a bit of distortion in there. So let's bring this back. Bless you, undo key. So in the end, we've got something that sounds like this. Interesting thing here, going back to like theory, you notice that these are chromatic, right? So whatever key this song is in, I'm kind of ignoring it and just going with these chromatic. I am staying on, this is the root note for this chord progression, the way I'm looking at it. So I do stick with the root note, but then I have these chromatic things come up. They're so fast that you don't really have time to pitch them and say, oh, that's in key, that's out of key. It's almost like when you're on a guitar and you just slide up the fretboard. So I just thought I'd point that out because there are options where you can snap to a key. Like right here, you can snap to a key. And if you do that, it'll snap all these notes into whatever key you tell it to. Okay, so that's it. Now let's listen to the release version one more time.
In that sink, you'll probably die. I'm tired of jumping through the hoops for all these kids' shows. Swimming in tiny circles, is bad for my mentals. I'm feeling murderous, but also sad. My dorsal fin is droopy as a meat flap.
Whale in the sink. Whale in the sink. You should never put a whale in the sink. I think that about wraps it up. If you like the song, it's available on all the platforms. It came out a few days ago. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the comments section. Also, if there's anything you found confusing, anything you want me to specifically look at, I know I covered a lot of ground on this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next Bedroom Producers with Chris Porro video. Bye. Your trainers are dead. What did you think would happen when you put a whale in the sink?